He passed away in 2004, and when he retired from Princeton, he moved to Durango, Colorado, and then for the next 20 years taught at Fort Lewis University, college, thank you. And he became so well known in Durango. When I would go down to visit him, I'd go into a bar and say, does anybody know where the old man is? And they'd say, oh, well, he's up in the mountains. He'll be back in a couple of days. They named a mountain after him, a 13,500-foot mountain in the San Juan Mountains. Well, when I showed up at Princeton as a postdoc, he met me at the Dinky station. If you know Princeton, you know what the Dinky is. And took me right out to the Institute woods, and we had a walk. And in this walk, he talked to me about, do you like to hike? Do you like to do this? What do you like to do? And he said, it's really great to have a student of singers here now, because we really need help in trying to figure it out what we're doing here. One of his students he appointed to be my TA in the course I was teaching, and that was Phil Griffiths, who later became director of the Institute for Advanced Study. But Phil was a student in his class, and Spencer's classes were totally disorganized and wild and totally out of proportion. He would come in there and say, well, we're going to have a real fun today, and in the middle of it, he'd get totally lost and kind of scratch his head and say, well, where were... He was the opposite of Jim's teacher. He didn't start on the left blackboard and go... No, he would go up there and just scrawl something on the board and then scrawl over it. And I asked Phil, how do you learn with this guy? By the way, he was the professor of mathematics at Princeton who had the most PhD students. So they just flocked to him. He said, well, the way we learn from him is we take notes, and then on Saturday morning, we get together and we go over them. Jim's experience just made me want to bring this in because it's really the same thing. We would spend all day until we had really understood what was going on, and then we would go to the bar and celebrate. So the second question I have for you is, what do all of these people have in common that you can think about while I go back and into my own personal history? When I got my degree and finished with my postdoc and became actually a faculty member, a professor of mathematics or an assistant professor of mathematics, I felt I understood exactly what needed to be done. I had to be as clear as I possibly could in presenting the material to the students. If I did that, all they'd have to do is absorb and learn. And so that's what I set out to do. Most of these first few years, besides doing research, I also wrote notes for my classes. I wrote textbooks. I wanted it all to be just so crystal clear and simple for my students that all they had to do was soak it up. And I was fairly successful at this. Most of us in this profession are fairly successful at this. But questions would come up. Oh, I can solve the problems, but I don't have a clue what I'm doing. Or, here comes the next one. Could you just grade the course on the weekly quizzes instead of the final? And I would say, well, the point of the final is to get you to understand things in a cumulative way. And they said, but I can't do that. After 3 weeks, I've already forgotten what, and so forth. Wait, a lot of you have heard these kinds of things. Or why can't you make up problems, essentially, that we can do? These things bothered me, particularly the first one, because I could see, in fact, that it was true. They could do the work, but I wasn't sure that they knew what they were doing. And so I began to study my practice, And I noticed a group of students in my class that were quite different from most of the students. You might, today we call them non-traditional, well, we call them non-traditional students, but you know who I am talking about. I am talking about married women in their 30s who, for either economic reasons or just married women with children in their 30s who want to come back to school and want to have a profession, and they're attracted to engineering and science, and so they want to take the mathematics course. They're extremely industrious, totally frightened, but very highly motivated. You can tell them to do anything and they will do it. And I said, why can't all my students be like that? How can they get motivation? So how can I motivate the typical student, and how can I get them to work? And then I began to, oh, by the way, at the same time, one of my hobbies was teaching. One of my hobbies, that was my profession. One of my hobbies was cooking. I loved to cook. And one of the cookbooks that I loved was one that one of my cousins in Italy gave to me. It is this is a classic Italian cookbook. She said it's almost in everybody's house. It is called, in English, The Science of Cooking and the Art of Eating Well. And one day while I was cooking, I said, that's it. It is the science of teaching and the art of learning well. And what I was missing, I was concentrating too much on the science of teaching and not enough on the art of eating well. By the way, my wife always pointed that out to me. She always said, your food is absolutely excellent, but you lack something in the presentation. So I began to look for motivators, and that's when I began to understand what these people had done to me. The biggest motivator, and you've heard this in almost every talk that's here, so I'm happy to say we seem to be unanimous, is to get the students to understand that they can do it. I can do it. Also, I think it's very important to stress applications. Now, I'm a mathematics professor, and I don't mean applied mathematics. I mean applications to real life exist. And I'm so thrilled that Liz is talking after me, because that's one of the applications they think about, just working with money, understanding money. I like to get my students, and that will attract them. They'll learn some mathematics if you tell them it has to do with money. I can do it. Application and association. Understanding not only the applications to one's real own life, but the association, the connections with other endeavors. And finally, also, what I call the proprioception of the mind. That is, and now this iterates something that we heard before. It's very important for a dancer to have a good sense of one's own body. I think it is very important for a mathematician to have a good sense of one's own mind and its place in the whole body of knowledge. So that was my transformative experience that lasted over 60 years, a transformation from understanding that the object of teaching is not content transmission, but in emphasizing the art of good learning and getting your students to understand that. And their role is they should be thinking not in terms of show me how to do this, but let me do it. Leave me alone. Ah! Guess what? I'm really through. And so what my mentors throughout my life did for me is they made me feel good about doing mathematics. I just want to end with a quotation from an op-ed piece that was in Thursday's New York Times. How many of you have seen that op-ed piece about teaching? It was written by a professor of English, I've come full circle, at Brown University, and she talked about, again, the same thing, the transformative experiences that she had when she was in 8th grade. And one of the very important things that I took out of that article is just this little quotation that she had. If we want to understand how much teachers are worth, we should remember how much we were formed by our own school days. Good teaching helps make productive and fully realized adults. I just love the way that is put, and that's the thought that we should stay with, and thank you for telling me my time is up.